Hello everyone, it's Channin here for Waffle Flower Crafts. In today's video, I'm going to create 2 cards using the adorable Hello Pumpkin stamp set, and I'll show you how I color the images using Tombow Dual Brush Pens. I'm going to start by stamping several images from the Hello Pumpkin stamp set. I'm using my Misty today, and I'm going to stamp onto Bristol paper. I will be watercoloring these images with my Tombow Dual Brush Pens, and I found the Bristol paper holds up to the water really well, and it's a very smooth surface, and the ink from the markers just glides over the surface, making it really easy to blend. I definitely prefer Bristol paper over watercolor paper when I watercolor with my Tombows. Since I'm watercoloring today, I'll need to use a waterproof ink, so I'm inking my images up in VersaFine Onyx Black ink, and then stamping them onto the Bristol paper. You can see that I have all the mice from the Hello Pumpkin stamp set, as well as a few accessories. For today's 2 card designs, I'm going to need several leaves as well as a few acorns and pumpkins, so I'm going to use one of my favorite techniques for mass producing stamped and die cut images. The first thing I need to do is just stamp the images onto some cardstock. I do have my stamps though well spaced apart. You don't want your stamps too close together to do this technique. After the images are stamped, you want to die cut the matching dies out of some heavyweight cardstock. Then with a pair of scissors, you'll trim around the negative, leaving at least a 1/4 inch border. Once trimmed, I'll then take the negative and center it over its corresponding stamped image. It's important to note here that I have not moved the stamps at all from my Misty. They're still the exact same spot as when I stamped them originally. Once I have the negative perfectly centered, I'll then hold it in place with a couple pieces of tape. I'll then repeat this process for all the other stamped images. After all my negatives are taped down, I'm ready for my die cuts. I went ahead and die cut my multiples off camera out of Bristol cardstock. Now all I have to do is pop the die cuts into the negative. The negative holds the die cut in place like a jig, and when I stamp, it'll be perfectly centered over that die cut. So now I just ink it up and stamp right on the die cuts, and I have 5 perfectly stamped die cuts. Once stamped, I'll grab a pair of tweezers to pop out the die cuts, and now the negatives are ready for some new blank die cuts. Just pop them in, ink up the stamps, stamp them, and I have a whole nother set of stamped and die cut images ready to go. This is such a great technique for mass producing stamped die cuts. And good thing too, because I needed 4 extra large leaves, 6 large leaves, 6 medium leaves, 4 acorns, and 3 small pumpkins to create today's 2 cards. We're almost ready to color, but to make these die cuts easier to paint, I'm going to temporarily adhere them to this cardboard. First I use my tape runner to make several rows of adhesive, then I remove some of the stick on the adhesive by rubbing it onto my clothes, and you can kind of see the black lint that's on the adhesive. Then I just stick all my die cuts down, and now they'll stay in place when I color. And now we're ready to color. I'm using Tombow Dual Brush Pens to watercolor today. These pens can be purchased individually or in sets. Today I'm using markers from the primary and secondary sets. To my right I have a sheet of plastic. I'm going to spray some water onto the plastic, then I'll use my paintbrush and pick up small amounts of water and use that to blend out my colors. But first I have to color in my images with my Tombow Dual Brush Pens. I'm starting with my lighter shade, so I'm starting with a lighter brown here, and my color's on screen so you can follow along as well. First I color the whole mouse with the lighter color, then I take the darker brown and just color any areas that would be in shadow or that are darker to create the illusion of shape or roundness. Once I finish coloring with my darker shade, I'll then take my paintbrush, dip it in a small amount of water, and then start to blend with the water to smooth out the transition from one color to the next, so I have a nice smooth gradation. Now I'm going to repeat this process for the other parts of the mouse. On his bandana, I'm just going to use one shade, just use the yellow on the darker parts and then blend out. On his sweater, I'm using 2 reds, lighter first, and then making the darker parts with the darker red, and then blending the transition between the 2 colors. I now want to add a glare to his glasses, but this blue is a little too intense, so I scribbled it onto my palette, and now I'm mixing the ink with some water. This will dilute the ink and create a lighter shade. Now I'll just paint a little glare on both of his lenses of his glasses, and this will add a little bit or the illusion of dimension to those glasses. I'm going to repeat this process for the ears as well. I'm going to take a red color, scribble it onto my palette, dilute it so it's a little pink, and I'm going to add this to the inner part of his ear. I'm now going to color another mouse as well as some of the other images on this paper, and then I'll move on to the die cuts. I have the colors on screen so you can follow along. I'm not going to show you the coloring for all the images because it's pretty repetitive, but I wanted to give you a little sampling of each shape so you know how I color each of them, and I'll meet you back when I'm just about done. I'm back. I'm just about finished with this acorn. I'm just going to add some cross-hatched lines at the top of it with my Tombow Dual Brush Pen, and that acorn is done. I colored the rest of the images off camera, so all these leaves, that's very repetitive, and I also finished up the mice off camera as well. I'm now going to die cut these images with the matching dies. So here are all my completed images die cut and colored and ready to add to my cards. I love these images, they're so cute, and I love the bright, vibrant colors I got from the Tombow Dual Brush Pens. I'm now going to move on to some ink blending. I have an A2 panel here made from 110-pound white cardstock. I used the largest die from Waffle Flower's A2 Nesting Rectangles 1 die set to add a stitched border to the panel. I now have 5 shades of Distress Oxides that I'm going to ink blend over this panel. I'm starting with my green, which is Mowed Lawn, and I'm just going to ink blend on the lower portion of the panel. When I'm ink blending, I find it really helpful to have a piece of scrap paper to tap off the excess ink from my ink blending tool onto. So I have a large piece of scrap paper here underneath my panel. Once I finish the Mowed Lawn, I'm moving on to Wild Honey, and I'm blending it just above the Mowed Lawn. Now moving on to an orange, this is Spiced Marmalade. I'm going to go back to the Mowed Lawn here and just make it a little higher, a little closer to my yellow. And now I'm moving on to Ripe Persimmon, and then finishing it up with Barn Door, a really nice red. Once I have one layer of all my inks down, I'm going to go back over with my inks again just to smooth out that transition from one shade to the next. And that will complete my ink blending. I'll also blend these same 5 colors on a circle that I die cut from 110-pound cardstock using Waffle Flower's Nesting Circles 1 die. With my backgrounds now complete for my 2 cards, I'm now going to move on to stamping on one of the front panels. I have an A2 panel here cut from 80-pound tan cardstock, and I used Waffle Flower's Lacy Layers die to add a pierced border around the panel. I'm now going to take 4 stamps, the 3 leaves, and the acorn from the Hello Pumpkin stamp set, mount them onto an acrylic block, and then I'm going to use Waffle Flower's Coffee Loves Milk to stamp this entire panel to do a beautiful tone-on-tone pattern paper. With this background stamping done, I'm now ready to move on to stamping my sentiment. I'm going to use my Misty to stamp my sentiment. I have a circle cut from craft cardstock using Waffle Flower's Flower Circles Inverted die set. I'm using that circle as a reference. I'll use it later on the card front. I'm going to put down some anti-static powder because I'm going to heat emboss this sentiment. I'm now going to ink up my sentiment with Versamark ink, then I will stamp it, and then I'll move on to some copper embossing powder. Just pour it over the top, tap off the excess, and then heat set with my heat gun. And now I'm ready to assemble my cards. I did stamp the sentiment on the left off camera in VersaFine Onyx Black, and it is also from the Hello Pumpkin stamp set. I also took this little mouse and cut around his arm here with an X-Acto knife so I can put a little book underneath. I did take a black Tombow marker and go around the outer edge of his arm so it was seamless, and now I'm just going to glue this little book under his arm. I'll now take a piece of foam tape and add it to the backside of that mouse, and I also added foam tape to the backside of all the mice so they're all ready now to add onto the card. But the first thing I need to do is adhere my panels onto my card bases. I'm going to use a tape runner to do this, and I'm going to adhere them onto 2 A2 card bases made from craft cardstock. Once they're adhered, I'm going to move on to adhering the circle. First I'm going to glue the inverted circle cut out of craft paper onto my ink blended one, and then I'll use liquid glue to adhere the circle onto the card front. I'm now ready to start adhering my images. I'm going to use liquid glue to adhere it down, and I'm going to take the leaves and some of the pumpkins and arrange them around this circle here, almost like garland. When I'm adhering these leaves, I don't add glue completely to the backside of the leaf. I only add about a dab in the center of each leaf. I do that because I want to be able to kind of curl or lift the edges of the leaf up to create a little bit of dimension. The leaves and pumpkins in place, I'm now ready to add my mice. I'll just remove the backing on the foam tape and stick them down. I'm now going to add a small amount of glue to the mouse on the right and put the leaf in his hand. To finish this card up, I'm going to add some sequins. I'm going to use Nuvo Crystal Drops as an adhesive. I'm just squeezing dabs of it around my circle. Then I'm going to grab my sequins and drop it on each one of the dots. And that will complete this card. For my second card, I'm going to start with these tiny pumpkins and just add a piece of foam tape to the backside of each one of the pumpkins. I'll then remove the backing and add them to the left and right side of the card. Now I'll add all the remaining leaves and acorns with liquid glue. I'll now remove the backing on the foam tape on each one of the mice and then add them above the sentiment. To finish this card up, I'm going to add a coffee cup to the left and right mouse's hands. And that's it. I'll hold it to the camera so you can get a good look at these cards. I love these mice. They are so cute. I think these three with their cool weather wear could be used for Christmas cards as well. I also love the bold and vibrant colors we got by watercoloring with Tombow Dual Brush Pens. I think these pens are a really great investment because you don't need hundreds of marker colors to get a gradation to create your shadows on your images. And that is it. I hope you enjoyed today's video and cards. If you want any more info on the products I use, please visit Waffle Flower, and you can follow us on YouTube, Instagram, and Facebook for more creative ideas. Thanks for watching and have a wonderful day.